Hello everyone, I'm Jeff Douglas on the product team for Agentforce Vibes. When building triggers, Salesforce developers spend a surprising amount of time on code that isn't business logic. Scaffolding trigger handlers, wiring up context, and bulkifying DML. It's the kind of work that has to be right, but it's the same pattern every time. Salesforce skills change that equation. A skill is a reusable instruction set that teaches Vibes the frameworks, conventions, and platform constraints your team already follows. Instead of prompting from scratch and hoping the output is correct, you encode your standards once, and Vibes applies them consistently across your projects. Let's say your team adopted an open source trigger framework a while back and layered on your own conventions. Over time, those standards ended up scattered across wiki pages, code review comments, and the brains of a few architects. Skills capture all of it in one place. When a developer describes what they need, Vibes doesn't just generate code. It generates code that conforms to the framework, the rules, and the conventions your team has already agreed on. That's the core benefit of skills. They turn tribal knowledge into repeatable, shareable, AI-ready instructions. This is the main skill file, a markdown document that tells Vibes exactly how to generate Apex triggers. It defines the trigger framework to follow, the 3 deliverable files every request should produce, and the coding standards to enforce. Bulkification, FLS via user mode, 1 trigger per object, and change detection in after context. It also includes good versus bad code examples right in the document. Things like avoiding DML in loops, using the bypass API correctly, and when to enable recursion prevention. Vibes reads these patterns and applies them every time. And finally, the trigger handler base class, the foundation of the framework. It handles context routing, recursion control, and the bypass API so that every handler your team writes only has to focus on business logic. Now let's put this to work. I just got a Slack message from my sales ops manager. Reps have been setting close dates in the past to gain pipeline reporting, and we need a follow-up task created automatically when an opportunity moves to closed won. We'll use the trigger skill to build this out. I'm going to copy that Slack message and paste it straight into the prompt. No formal spec, no reformatting. That's part of the point. The skill handles the translation from plain language to framework-compliant code. After a few seconds, Vibes comes back with an implementation plan. I could ask questions, suggest changes, or adjust the approach. But everything looks good here, so I'll switch to act mode and let Vibes get to work. Vibes picks up the skill, reads the project structure, and starts generating files. After a few minutes, all of the code and metadata have been created. We'll deploy it to the org and run the unit tests. Let's look at what it produced. The trigger simply delegates all calls to this handler class. The follow-up task logic fires in both after insert and after update using the same private helper. On insert, it catches opportunities that come in already set to closed won. On update, it uses the old map to detect when the stage actually changes, so it only creates a task when the deal moves to closed won, not on every edit. Notice that Vibes handled the close date validation as a declarative validation rule, rather than putting it in the trigger handler. The test class has a happy path for the follow-up task, a negative case that asserts the close date validation error, and a bypass test that the skill generates by default. And finally, here's the trigger handler base class that makes it all work. That's the power of skills for Salesforce development. Write the skill once, and from that point on, anyone on the team can go from a business requirement to deployed production-ready code without having to know the framework inside out. Less boilerplate, fewer review cycles, and consistent quality across the board.